Think you know America's destinations? Well, think again.
The gap between the visitor's perception and locals' perception is as big in St. Louis as I've ever seen in any community.
We made a decision to really advertise and promote who Charleston really is, not who we wish we were.
Come here and see up close what it is like to live in America. You won't be disappointed.
On View from Afar, you can discover the real America. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's back to school season, and Clorox is donating 2 million disinfecting wipes to classrooms across America. Because back to school means things can get a little bit messy. Just ask kindergarten teacher Miss Gibson.
Give me just one Clorox wipe and I'm ready for glitter glue, exploded lunchbox yogurt, peanut butter handprints, runny noses, picking noses, rubbing noses.
Touching noses.
Thank you, Edward. Ooh, nap mats and lockers and tissue boxes. And
Clorox
scissors.
disinfecting wipes. Teacher's #1 wipe. Clean feels good. Based on unit sales data.
Hello, friends and family. Welcome back to the Sober is Dope podcast. I am excited to bring a special guest on, Nicky Wake. Nicky is someone who transformed profound grief into healing. And her story is beautiful. I mean, I can identify with her because I lost my dad when I was young and I saw my mother as a widow go through grief. So her story is truly appealing to me, and I wanted to bring her on the Sober is Dope podcast so we could talk about how to transform grief into something positive. Now, here's a quick look at her bio, and I'm going to have the honor of bringing Nicky Wake onto the podcast. Nicky Wake is a widow, entrepreneur, and sober living advocate who has transformed profound grief into groundbreaking purpose. After losing her husband in March of 2020, Nicky turned to alcohol to cope with the pain until a powerful decision to enter rehab in November of 2024 changed her life. Out of her healing journey, Nicky created Chapter 2 Dating, a platform for widows and widowers ready to open their hearts again. From there, she launched Sober Love, a dating app for those embracing life and love without alcohol, and Widow's Fire, a space that candidly explores intimacy and desire after loss. With honesty in heart, Nicky shares what it means to grieve, to grow, and to rediscover connection in sobriety. Her mission is clear: to help others feel less alone as they navigate life after loss, and to redefine what love can look like after heartbreak. With no further ado, it's a true honor to bring Nicky Wake on the Sober is Dope podcast. Nicky, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. Thank you for the invite. Great to be here.
You're welcome. I was saying in the bio, and this is a very powerful subject for me, grief in general. I'm a kid who lost his dad at 13 years old. That form of trauma and grief is what later kind of, I think, fed into my addiction of alcohol. And it wasn't until I confronted that pain that I started to make sense of my grief and trauma and make sense of my recovery, right? So I had to kind of do it in reverse. Why that's important to our talk is that I had the liberty of witnessing my mother from the perspective of a widow.
Yep.
Lost her husband of 25 years, and how she coped personally with her pain and stuff like that. And I've seen how that played out 30, 40 years later, 50 years later. So for my mom, and so it's really emotional for me. So I'm just happy to have you on the podcast to talk about your experience with grief and how you turn that into the transformative power to create from that grief. So my first question to you is this: how did the loss of your husband in 2020 shape your relationship with grief and alcohol? And what led to your turning point in 2024?
Okay. Yeah. Big question. I think I'd always been a drinker. So I grew up in the kind of late 80s, 90s in the UK. It was very boozy culture. So it was absolutely expected as a woman that you would match a guy drink for drink. Wine o'clock was very much a thing. And I'd always drunk, but never to what I thought was a problematic position. Very much just kind of, it was part of life and life's rich fabric. And myself and my husband were probably enablers to a certain degree, because he would always be opening a bottle of wine at 5 o'clock or whatever. So drink was definitely embedded within our relationship, but it wasn't what I would class as problematic. When Andy fell ill in 2017, he suffered a heart attack, which resulted in a catastrophic brain injury. So he was profoundly disabled and ended up in 24/7 specialist care. So he didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who I was. He was completely and utterly disabled. It was tragic to see the love of my life just ripped from me. So although technically I was still married, emotionally I was widowed. I knew. So his doctor came to me 2 weeks into the hell of being in ICU unit, and his doctor said to me, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wake, but your story doesn't have a happy ending."
Wow.
And he basically was telling me that my husband was going to die. We just didn't know when. And sure enough, unfortunately, that was the case. And he, he survived 3 years, but then we lost him in 2020 to COVID. But the actual trigger point, if you like, for what I think kicked off my alcoholism was when I was when he had his second heart attack at home, I was doing CPR for 40 minutes before the ambulance could arrive. So that's when he suffered the catastrophic brain injury.
Wow.
As soon as the ambulance arrived, they took over, and I literally, the first thing I did was to go straight to the wine rack, and I downed a bottle of wine in about 3 minutes while they were working on him, because my world had imploded and fallen apart, and I had the kind of PTSD, if you like, of doing the CPR. And so instantly something hardwired in my brain that was like, my way to cope with this is alcohol. And I remember taking, like, when he was in intensive care for 2 weeks, and he was in an induced coma, and we were praying and hoping that he was going to be all right when they brought him out of his coma, and he wasn't. But the only way I got through those 2 weeks was I was literally smuggling vodka in Diet Coke bottles into ICU and sitting just drinking to cope. My whole world had imploded. I had to go home and tell my then 9-year-old son that his daddy was never going to get better. It was the world's worst outcome. So he was technically still alive, but I'd lost him, and it also left a whole unholy mess, legally and financially, because he'd lost capacity, and we were joint directors in a business. I had massive legal battles to try and retain control of everything. So it was the darkest and most awful of periods. And my only way to cope with that life-changing experience was to drown my sorrows, quite literally.
Wow.
And so for 3 years, I was just a highly functioning alcoholic. I never missed a day's work. Finn, my son, never missed a day's school. But the only way I could cope was to numb the unholy pain of what happened, and how I used to wake up incredulous that this was my life, and this has happened to me. This wasn't part of the plan. We were a perfect little happy nuclear family having a fantastic time. Life was good. I was a successful business owner. Everything was perfect. And in a heartbeat, quite literally, my life fell apart, and I sought solace in drink at the bottom of a wine bottle.
They say to only bring what you can carry. So with the all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor, bring a lot. Like 3 dirt bikes, a few tents, an entire crew ready to make memories. a panoramic 24-inch display, and the confidence to push your limits. The all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor.
Always consult the owner's manual before off-road driving. Know your terrain and trail difficulty and use appropriate safety gear. Max payload varies based on accessories and vehicle configuration. See label on door jamb for carrying capacity of a specific vehicle. Always properly secure cargo.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Oh, wow. Well, first and foremost, I started this off wrong. I should have started off by sending my condolences to your husband and you guys. I'm sorry, life. Like, it's just, things happen in life that we can't expect. I saw my world turn upside down in a heartbeat with my dad. I was right there. Same thing. My dad died of a heart attack. I was very upset because I felt like, well, why couldn't you do more? And well, what happened? And in retrospect, he was very young. He was only 52, So,
Yeah, my husband was 54. So
Right. So we lose these beautiful people unexpectedly. I do believe in faith, and I do believe somehow we live on. So if that's any solace, it's been about 24 years since my dad passed away, and I still see him in my dreams a lot as different characters. He's always doing something. And I don't know what that could be, if it's a mechanism of the mind or the spirit or foresight into the afterlife. But what I do know is that the creativity on how he looks gives me hope. Like sometimes he's young and he's on an adventure. Sometimes he's always doing something in some place that I don't recognize, that don't quite look like Earth. But it's just a magical kind of foresight into what's to come. And it gives me hope. So I'm sorry you had to go through that. Now, 3.5 or 4 years of just drowning and numbing your pain through alcohol. How did you stay functional? Were you still eating? Were you on medication, or were you just lucky?
A bit of all of the above. So I was on medication. I was prescribed antidepressants. I continue to drink while taking them, which is obviously completely against guidelines, but was again just my way of coping. I am just highly functioning. I now run 4 businesses. My way of coping with life is to keep going, and so I just put schedules in place for myself to make sure that I did keep functioning and to make sure that I was getting Finn to school on time, etc. I struggled a bit with kind of self-love and personal care, and all of that kind of goes out the window, doesn't it? When you're in the throes of addiction, you don't love yourself, and therefore you don't take care of yourself. So, well, I wasn't eating properly, but I was getting calories from alcohol, and existing on the fumes of that. During those 3 years, I was pretty highly functioning. When I finally lost Andy in 2020, that's when my drinking, in my sense, became chaotic and problematic. So at that point was where I kind of had my 2 rock bottom pits. So when we finally lost Andy, I lost him in the end to COVID. And so an infection took him out, and I couldn't visit him in the nursing home, and all of that terrible COVID scenario. We had a funeral with 8 people. It was terrible. But the world went into lockdown. I lost him very early in COVID, and lockdown was the worst thing that could have happened for me. Mainly because I'm an extrovert. I'm a people person, and all of a sudden I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't even hug my dad. And I did. It was a beautiful hot summer in the UK in 2020, and I literally bought an inflatable hot tub and sat outside drinking wine for 3 months in a hot tub. and my day job is I run an events company. So I was trying to manage an events company through COVID, which was a joy as well, obviously. But that COVID lockdown period was very dangerous for me as an alcoholic, and I suspect also for lots of other people. In fact, I think a lot of people who weren't alcoholic potentially became alcoholic through those COVID times, because it was perfectly acceptable to day drink all the time. And then obviously when lockdown eased and everyone went back to proper jobs, I just carried on my day drinking. Starting every day with wine at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I had what I'd class as my two kind of rock bottom incidents. So the first was a fall. It was the morning after a particularly heavy night. And I tripped in a car park and face planted and was terribly bruised and battered, and was in bed injured. I'd smashed my hip. I didn't break anything, amazingly, but I was a right mess for 6 to 8 weeks and needed physio. And yet I still kept drinking and didn't blame the drink. So obviously the drink. And my friends and family were very worried about me. And then my second incident was I tried to stop and go cold turkey. And as I'm sure a lot of the people who listen to your podcast will know, that's an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And I had a seizure. And I was rushed into ER, and they did a medical detox in the hospital there, but it was the NHS. It wasn't, it didn't have any wraparound therapy or anything else with it. And so I discharged myself after the 3 days detox and bought wine on the way home. And it took another 6 months after that for me to finally hit, now this has got to stop. And it wasn't, in the end, it wasn't around a specific incident. It was just, I'd hit that point where stopping drinking was less painful than the effect the next drink was going to have. I just hit that point of like, this has to stop. And that's when I decided to check into rehab, which was, the best thing I ever did.
Oh, congratulations. So you came to this realization on your own. It was like the universe was nudging you along here. Yeah. Fall out here, rest in the bed for 6 weeks here, go for another 6 months here, burn out, and eventually you go, okay. So that's chapter one in your life. Andy unfortunately has his fall. You go through two kind of mourning periods, the one losing him through his loss of consciousness, then him actually passing away because of this COVID thing. Then you have to cope on your own through isolation. Listen, any one of us could have went through the same process, and I think you handled it to the best of your ability. I don't want to demonize or even talk down to your process. You was doing the best that you could to cope. And miraculously, you dug deep enough to find the will to pull yourself out. So let's say you're going through all of this. You mentioned something close to the lines of PTSD. A lot of this is traumatic, right? Yeah. Well, most people don't know they have a term called PTG, which is post-traumatic growth.
Right. No, I didn't know that. I like that.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
Dr. Michael Tedeschi was the one who coined that phrase, and he said most of us could be resilient and out of our trauma and our PTSD grow into a stronger, more resilient, refined human being. I like that. Right. And that's exactly what you did. So you go into, you find your recovery, you hit rock bottom, you check yourself in, you do what you have to do. Coming out of all of that, I call that chapter one of your life. Then you go into chapter two, and along with that brings me to my next question, because you created something along the themes of chapter two. So what inspired you to create chapter two, dating, and what does chapter two really mean for someone grieving a partner?
Okay, so obviously when I lost Andy, I became a widow, which is the first time I'd used that phrase, in my identity, and that's quite a jarring experience. And it's a club that no one wants to join. It's a club with the highest admission price, because you give up the love of your life to join the widow community. And I found great strength in hanging out with other widows. And I went to quite a few widow meetups, which sound like really depressing things, but I promise you they're not. They're great fun. And there's a huge kind of community and camaraderie amongst those. And at one of those, somebody said to me once, have you thought about a chapter 2? And the phrase chapter 2 in widow circles means your next significant relationship. So it's your second chapter, if you like, in life. And I thought, this is about a year after I'd lost Andy, I thought, do you know what? I need to find some hope and some joy. And so I am going to try and start dating again, because I knew that Andy wouldn't want me to be on my own.
Right.
So I'd met Andy online back in 2002. We were total early adopters of the technology. So I knew it worked, you know.
Right.
So I downloaded this thing called Tinder, and I went on, and oh my goodness, it's like the Wild West, isn't it? So,
It is.
like online dating had changed so much in like 20 years. I was like, it was full of dick pics and ghosting and married men. And I was thinking, there's got to be a better way than this. And I don't know, really, really disastrous date where a guy I was dating said to me, "Are you still grieving?" And I was like, it's a year later. Of course I'm still grieving. Anyway, and I thought, what I need is a widower. I need someone ideally who looks like George Clooney, but you know, a widower who he would understand what I'm going through, because it's very complex dating as a widow, because you're full of guilt, and you know, I'd never have chosen to be single. You know, I had my love of my life. We were all sorted. It was ripped from me. So I thought, well, a widower would understand. So I thought, well, there must be a dating app for widows and widowers, because there's dating apps for everything, isn't there? You know, people who like tattoos, people who like beards, whatever. You can find a niche.
Right.
And I went online and there wasn't. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. I run a very successful events company. But I'm always coming up with ideas for new businesses. And I went online, I went on the App Store and the Google Play Store, and there wasn't an app for widows and widowers. And so I thought, well, there's an opportunity. So I registered the domain chapter2dating.app, and I went out and I raised 100 grand's worth of funding.
Wow.
I've actually since raised, where you know, in terms of like Shark Tank, I've raised 250 now.
Wow.
And I launched in September 2022. I launched chapter2dating.app. We've now got 20,000 members. We are in the UK, the US, Australia, and Canada. And we've had 4 marriages, about 15 engagements, and I've made about people happy. I am still, however, technically single. So, yeah, despite being quoted as a relationship and dating expert in the press, I'm clearly not. So, yeah, I'm on Bumble if you're looking for me, because I don't use my insights. Chapter 2 is a huge success. We have a naughty sister app called Widow's Fire, which is widowsfire.dating. And that's basically a hookup app for widows and widowers. Because
I love that.
Often we're not ready for serious relationships.
Right.
We've got an itch to scratch.
Right. I love this.
So we started that. And then with my own kind of recovery, so obviously we'll talk about rehab and stuff, I'm sure. I realized the challenges that we have dating as sober people. And so in March this year, March 2025, I launched soberlove.app, which is a dating app for the sober community and the sober curious. And that's live in the UK and the US.
I love that. Now, Sober Love is the beautiful idea. Chapter 2, all of these are great ideas. And I really... recently, within the last 2 years, my lady of about 16 years, 13 of which I have been sober, and you know, she's 2 years in, so I'm really like freshly enjoying this new relationship we have. with her new sobriety, my short to long-term sobriety so far. I mean, 13 years is not technically
I was
long-term.
going to say, I'd say that's not far.
It's still kind of it's still, but no, it's a real important thing, and I always imagine if God forbid something happened to us, I will definitely be on the market looking for someone in the recovery space because I don't have the intestinal fortitude or the mental fortitude to deal with someone drinking. I swear I cannot, because I mean I would get triggered. So that's amazing. This is something that I would like to talk about from the point of view of recovery and from the point of view of loss and grief. How does one regain intimacy and a zest to love again? And can you give us some insights on that based on all your professional experience and any tips to anyone out there that's new in recovery, that's disconnected from feeling sexy, feeling intimate, like feeling like they're ready for intimacy, engaging into intimacy, or someone who's experiencing loss? What have you learned along the way, and can you share any advice in that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I remember I was 3 days into rehab, and they gave me a leaflet that had the words sober sex written on it. They do like a leaflet. They do like a leaflet in rehab, don't they? But and I looked at the leaflet and I thought, do you know what? I don't think I've ever had sober sex. You know, because if you just think about it, you know, the majority of kind of sexual encounters are usually when one is a little inebriated or something. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I was having problems dating as a widow, but now dating as a sober widow. And that's when I had the idea for Sober Love. So that was 3 days into rehab. I registered the domain soberlove.app. And I know that there's Lucid in the States, but there is nothing in the UK. And so yeah, in terms of, so I realized when I was in rehab that I probably had never had sober sex. And then when I obviously they recommend, and quite rightly, that in rehab, when you're first out of rehab, that you shouldn't get involved with somebody if you're not already. You know, and to tread carefully. And there's the whole thing about 13 stepping and, you know, whatever else is. So, you know, I knew that I had to take my time and look after myself. And I booked a cruise for myself, a solo cruise, as a 90-day prize. You know, I've done 90 days. I'm gonna treat myself with what I saved and go. And I did a solos cruise. And I went to the solos night on the first night, and I met a guy, and we hit it off, and we went for a drink afterwards. And obviously, he noticed I wasn't drinking, and so he said to me, "You know, do you not drink?" And I said, "No, I'm in recovery." And his brother was an alcoholic, so he understood. And he gave me a kiss, and I said, "Oh, that's my first ever sober kiss, I think." And we arranged to have dinner the next night. And the next night he didn't drink. And I was like, no, you can drink. And he's like, no, because if you're going to have sober sex, I want to be sober too.
Oh, wow.
Sweet. So I was obviously really nervous personally about, you know, getting my kit off for the first time and all of that. But actually it was a beautiful and empowering experience, and to be fully present and in the moment was a wonderful thing. So my one piece of advice would be, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. You know, make sure that you communicate clearly your boundaries. You know, for me, it was good that he wasn't drinking, and therefore I wasn't around drink on that occasion. You know, I think certainly I felt empowered and more confident. I certainly felt more present and in the moment. And how lovely to wake up with no regrets and no hangover. You know, that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? You know,
it's beautiful.
So yeah, and I think, you know, likewise, loving again after loss, or having, you know, intimate relationships after loss is very difficult, because you know, I personally didn't want to sleep with anybody ever again but my husband, you know. So there's a whole load of complex thoughts and grief and guilt and emotions there. But I think in that case, dating after loss, you just have to think, what would my partner want? He would want me to be happy, and he would. I think there's no way that Andy would want me to spend the rest of my life on my own. And I think the one thing about being widowed is that it makes you live for the moment, because you know that life can and does change in a heartbeat.
Right.
And therefore, widows, I mean, I'm terrible. I'm like, book the ticket, book the holiday, do the whatever, because there are no pockets in a shroud, and life tomorrow is not guaranteed.
Right.
And therefore, I think you kind of have to take that approach, to living the very best life that you can. And that very best life includes connection with other human beings, physically, romantically, and emotionally. And yeah, I mean, for me, I personally have found that I make much better decisions now I'm sober. I date more intelligently now I'm sober. Turns out I'm much better in the bedroom sober as well.
Right.
You know what I mean? I've got to do more empty. My balance is better.
Right.
I used to be quite lazy, I think, and now I'm like a Russian athlete in the bedroom. So yeah, I think like anything in life, if you're fully there and present and in the moment, then that's and don't forget the dopamine kick from sex is fantastic.
It's fantastic.
And you're much more attuned to be able to feel these things. So
I love that. Thank you for that. I always tell people because one of the fears that people have about sobriety and getting help is how I'm going to hook up with the opposite sex, or how I'm going to hook up with a person that I love or someone that I love, and how I'm going to be interested in how the hell I'm going to have sex. And I always tell them, listen, you were born sober. Your body's designed to experience these things in a sober space. So you can't imagine how better it's going to be. Like it's night and day. I hated how all my experiences in retrospect, when I was under the influence, I mean, you have the occasional good times, but I'm talking about like literally 80 to 85% of them could not even hold a match to how it is now in recovery, because it's just, you're literally, all cylinders are moving. You're aware. One thing I'll tell people in early recovery, it takes quite a bit of time for your hormones and everything to reboot and kick back in. So you might have this little period where you feel unmotivated, your libido may be off, or your desire may be off. But once that kicks in with nutrition, once your brain starts to heal, your dopamine receptors and everything starts to normalize, okay, you wake up. So this subject is very passionate for me, and I'm really excited that we covered it. So if you're out there, you're a little bit on the fence, give sobriety a shot, because sex and life and intimacy will improve immensely. So before we go, we got about 10 minutes left. I want you to give I want you to tell people where they can find you specifically, Nicky, because your story is so inspirational, and I would love to have you back on to do a deeper dive into intimacy and love and the whole spiel. But how can people find you if they're looking for you online, and to interview you or to catch up with just your dating apps and your businesses?
Yeah, so my personal website is nickywake.com. So that's NICKYWAKE.com. And on that site, there are all my contact details, but also there is a link to all of the different things in my portfolio. As I said, I'm an entrepreneur. I like to keep busy. And now another thing we should talk about is productivity. Like, my productivity is through the roof now. I'm sober. Like, I have gained 2 extra days a week, I swear, in terms of like time to do stuff. Now I'm not drinking. But there's a couple of projects on there that could be of interest. Obviously, there's all of my apps. So chapter2dating.app, widowsfire.dating, and soberlove.app. So please check those out. And if anyone is listening and wants to sign up to Sober Love, if they sign up and then email me, Nicky@soberlove.app, I will give you a month's free premium just for listening to.
Wow. All right. Okay.
Hopefully we can make some marriages between us. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but we both want invites to the weddings. Okay,
Okay, that's right.
I look fabulous in peach as a bridesmaid or maid of
Nice.
honor. And so all of those details are on there. But I've also started, and I'd love to come back and talk to you about this one in more detail. Something called Sober AF. So soberaf.club. So sober, as you can guess what that stands for.
Right.
Is a peer-to-peer support network. So I personally struggled with AA. It didn't massively resonate for me. And so I think AA is brilliant, and I think it's helped millions and millions of people. But for me, I wanted a different kind of support network. And so I've built Sober AF, which is an online forum. We're going to do virtual meetings. So that's a community site that I've built just to kind of support the wider community. So for people who are sober but aren't interested in dating. So that's started. And then I've also started in a similar vein something called the Widowed Collective, which again is a community site for widows and widowers. So just a couple of extra bits to my
I love your productivity and what you're doing. I swear, most people don't talk about this, but I'm a whole different person in recovery. Like I wrote 4 books since sober. I launched Sober is Dope. I'm about to launch a non-for-profit. The coaching. I'm a musician. I have a record label, and I'm a digital artist. I have an art company with my girl. Not to mention everything else that I want to build. I learned how to day trade. I learned all of this stuff. I would never in a light year been able to do anything like this if I was still drinking. I was just so stuck. And I know if you're out there and listening, most likely you feel stuck too, and there is hope. So, Nicky, thank you so much for this beautiful episode. I would love to have you back on to talk about productivity, how to build businesses. We have great camaraderie. And I just want to extend Sober is Dope, Pop Buchanan. You could use me in any way possible. You always have an open invitation to invite me to speak or do anything. All my experience, we could partner up and stuff. I love you. I love what you're doing, and you inspired me today. So,
thank you.
Before we go, God bless Andy. God bless you, and I wish you immense love on your chapter 2 in this new journey in your life.
Thank you so much. And I'll drop you a note to follow up on everything, and let's do some more stuff together.
All right, you got it. You're listening to the Sober is Dope podcast. That's a wrap for our phenomenal episode with Nicky Wake. And if you out there, don't give up on love. There's always a second chance and a second shot at love and life and recovery. I love you all. Go in peace, and I'll catch you on the other side. God bless everyone.